June 5th, 2023 episode. We've had a lot go on this past weekend. It's been a busy weekend, been a busy day if you keep up with college baseball like we do on this show. I was at a wedding down in Destin, back and forth, checking on my phone, up when we were at the condo, watching, go back and forth from the beach. Wife was getting on to me. Every guy out there knows exactly what I'm talking about. But again, we have right now, looking at it right now, Tennessee, South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, and LSU have all moved on to super regionals. Vandy, Vanderbilt, Auburn, and Arkansas. All seasons come to an end. Successful seasons, nonetheless, for both teams. All three teams hosted. So successful season overall for both those three teams. Right now, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams. Kentucky battling right now. I'm whipping it up right now. The latest score I got is the bottom of the 6th. Kentucky's up 3-2 in this game. So if Kentucky wins this, they beat Indiana, they avenge that loss, they will be punching their ticket to the Super Regional. They would be going to Baton Rouge for a matchup with LSU. They've already been there this year. So that would put 5 SEC teams hosting. Then you got A&M tonight. They're playing their final game against Stanford. Winner will go on and take on Texas, the winner from the Miami Regional, the Coral Gables Regional. So that's where we stand right now from an SEC standpoint. We got, 5 locked in, with potentially 7 by the end of the night. 5 guaranteed from the SEC, from the Southeastern Conference, going on to Super Regional. So Super Regional starting next weekend, with 2 to be determined. I'll keep you up to date on that Kentucky score. But we also have a great guest joining us today in Sports Illustrated's college football lead writer, Ross Dellenger, who's one of the more respected college football writers around the country. He will be joining the show today. He was in Destin last week for the SEC spring meetings. He will join us to talk about what was on the docket down there in the Panhandle, just his kind of overall feel where things stand. And then I saw an interesting article from 247 Sports, Brad Crawford, projecting, as you remember, the SEC said for the 2024 season they were going to go with the 8-game conference schedule, just kind of an interim thing. It's getting a lot of backlash out there. I personally don't think it's as big of a deal. We'll talk to Ross about it. But Brad Crawford from 247 Sports went and projected each team in the SEC, including Texas and Oklahoma's 2024 conference schedule. So remember, the 1 permanent and the 7 rotation. So that's where they're at right now. From that standpoint, I will go over that article, who he projects all 16 teams will play from that standpoint in the SEC. Just kind of wanted to go through, just dive in, dissect some of those dawning schedules. We're going to roll through it and be, dang, they got to go through that. So it's surface level. We have a whole 23 season to play before we get to 24, but it's a good time to talk about it, especially this time of year, June 5th. But quickly, we have some updates in the coaching profession on the baseball side of things. The 2 schools that have openings now, 2 out of the 3 between Georgia, Missouri, and Alabama. 2 of them have named head coaches here in the past few days. Georgia today announced right after LSU beat Oregon State to advance to the Super Regional, they're hiring first-year pitching coach for LSU, Wes Johnson, who was the Minnesota Twins pitching coach these past few years. He is now going to be the head man in Athens. Interesting timing to announce that right after the Tigers went and advanced to the Super Regionals. But nonetheless, I think Georgia kind of a lazy hire, if I'm being honest with you. Nothing against Wes Johnson. I just think it could potentially be a real lazy hire. Kind of shows you're probably not going to go – Georgia just kind of proved to me here with this hire. Not taking a jab at Josh Brooks either, but they're going to go for the lower tier salary-wise. Now, Wes Johnson could end up taking Georgia to multiple Super Regionals, Omaha appearances, but I don't know if I see that. I think Georgia could have spent a lot more money. They're just telling me they're investing in football. If you go off what they've done in basketball, I thought White. I thought White was a pretty lazy hire, if I'm being honest, in basketball. I think Wes Johnson, kind of a lazy hire. If you want to go compete in the SEC in baseball, you have to be willing to spend over $1.5 million a year on a good baseball coach. It is what it is. Georgia showed their true colors. They're not really investing into baseball right now. They should have a high ceiling. They should almost be hosting a regional 3 out of every 5 years, but they're not. But nothing against Wes Johnson, could end up being a great hire. Just kind of think it was the low-hanging fruit. I know LSU's had some pitching injuries this year, but again, not really a strength of the team outside of Paul Skeens. Missouri hiring the first African-American coach in the Southeastern Conference. Missouri hires Memphis head coach Carrick Jackson, who's been at Missouri, I believe, from 2011 to 2015 as an assistant. He's also been the head coach at Southern University out of the SWAC in Baton Rouge. So good hire. Has some roots there in Missouri. Will be. I don't know a lot about the guy. I'll be honest with you. I'm just as intrigued about it as anyone else. But both Missouri and Georgia making baseball hires. That just leaves one job opening left. That's Alabama. A lot of whispers if it could be McDonald over at Louisville. A lot of whispers kind of about that. I've seen Tadlock's name with Texas Tech, their head coach. It's his alma mater, Texas Tech. I don't know if he would leave. Haven't really seen Cliff Godwin much, East Carolina's coach. Hadn't seen his name thrown around there as often as I've seen some of the other guys. But those are some names thrown around for Alabama. Again, they're heading to a super regional, and they'll play Wake Forest next week. So I'm sure Greg Byrne, the Alabama AD, is trying to get through that before he does anything else. But those are just the two updated baseball hires around the conference, both Missouri and Georgia getting their guy. But as you know, we always start the show off with some transfer portal news. We hadn't had some football news in a while, but we do. Auburn and Ole Miss both getting commits, starting with the Rebels. Zachary Franklin, the 6'1", 185 wide receiver from UTSA, is transferred to Ole Miss. He was the school record for the UTSA Roadrunners for most single-game, single-season, and career receptions. I'm reading right here. Went and watched the film. Good player. Could really help Ole Miss. I think they were expecting a lot of the A&M transfer, Chris Marshall. Obviously, he's no longer with the program. Ole Miss had to kind of go fill that. Boy, they need someone to go step up on that side. This is probably a good fit for both teams. Good marriage for both parties here for Franklin and Ole Miss. I like Pierce Corn, the tight end for Ole Miss. I think he's going to be a good player. And then I think you also have, if Michael Trigg can step up, that could be a threat on the outside for the Rebs. So it'll be interesting. Ole Miss needs some help on the outside, especially after losing Mingo to the draft. So Ole Miss fixing that, or at least attempting to fix that. Then Auburn takes a JUCO transfer, a corner, DB, could play nickel. Champ Anthony, 6'1", 175. With 3 years left, you kind of like him as more of a bridge. I mean, he's got 3 years left. And guys at the end of this year, Nehemiah Pritchett, DJ James, Jalen Simpson, and guys like Jalen Puckett, they're going to be going. So he'll have 2 more years and get in a little bit of a role, being the 2 deep this year, get his feet wet, and then get real experience heading into the 24 season. Not a bad pickup for Auburn right there though, to the Champ Anthony, from a DB from Tyler JUCO. We're 6'1", 175, long kid. I was going to say Champ Bailey, but Champ Anthony. But moving to the basketball transfer portal, still kind of open. I feel like we're still figuring out some rosters there. Again, football slowed down a little bit. This is the first time we in a while. Ole Miss and Auburn changed that. But moving to basketball, no one got better news than Chris Jans again. He got Tolu Smith to announce he was coming back, but he's got DJ Jeffries and Deshaun Davis both announcing they're coming back. DJ Jeffries averaged 8.8 points per game, 6.4 rebounds per game last year. Deshaun Davis averaged 8.7 points per game. Mississippi State has a lot of people back. It's, again, going to be a good tournament team. Just some guys need to take it to that next level from an offensive standpoint, and I think the Bulldogs will be a bit better next year. I think with Chris Jans, they're always going to be a tenacious defense, rebounding team. But again, need to develop some offensively, have some guys coming back. Their off-season program and how they develop some kind of offensive game will be the telling point for the Bulldogs next year. Tyron Lawrence has removed himself from the transfer portal. He decided he's heading back to Nashville to play for Jerry Stackhouse and the Commodores. Name was mentioned around with Auburn. He's heading back to Vandy. That's good news for Jerry Stackhouse. He's needed some here recently. Missouri and Dennis Gates receive a commitment from a familiar face if you're keeping up with the SEC in basketball. Former SEC player and Oral Roberts transfer center Connor Vanover. You probably remember the 7'3" center from his days at Arkansas. Spent 2 years in Arkansas. He averaged 12.7 points per game, 7.2 boards, and 3.2 blocks per game this past year for the Oral Roberts Eagles. But he transferred out of Arkansas to Oral Roberts. Now he's back in the SEC with Dennis Gates in the boys. And then just some other guys to talk about around the league who could be potential additions for some teams. Speaking with Alabama and Arkansas here. North Dakota State transfer Grant Nelson, probably a top guy in the transfer portal left. Looks like he's between Alabama, Baylor, and Arkansas. He's going to be taking all 3 OVs this weekend. So this would really help a team like Alabama, who probably needs it more than most here after the loss of Charles Bediako. Alabama needs some front court, not only depth, just some guys after Nick Pringle. That's really the only guy sitting there. But Grant Nelson would be a big addition for Alabama. And then really for anybody, Baylor and Arkansas. But it looks like it's down to those 3. Then Creighton transfer, Arthur Kaluma. You remember him, the 6'7", average 11.8 points per game, 6 rebounds per game. Down to Alabama, Kansas State, and Texas right now. Now, remember, the basketball transfer portal is a little even more fluid than even the college football portal is, if you really want to be completely honest with us. those are the teams right now I could see some more. I think he's taking his time with his decision. But that's it from a transfer portal standpoint. Auburn and Ole Miss pick up big additions. Really, Auburn from a depth standpoint. Ole Miss needed it. Some basketball portal additions, some guys announcing and pulling names out of the NBA draft, the transfer portal, some visits coming up for teams like Alabama who still have some roster spots available. And then Jaron Stevens from Alabama. Looks like it's an Alabama-North Carolina battle. Mom played basketball at North Carolina. He's a reclassification of 24 to 23. He will be eligible next year. Looks like he's still a couple weeks away from that decision. We will keep you updated on that. But that's it for the basketball portal and college football portal. Moving over to the Diamond before we get our guy, Ross Dellenger. He's just on deck, probably about 10 minutes away. So if you want to stay with us here, we're getting into the NCAA tournament, though. It started this past weekend, regionals. The SEC, I said, the 5 teams that advanced to next week's super regional matchups. I named them earlier: South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, and LSU right now. Kentucky's playing. Let's get a little updated score for you right now for the Wildcats over in the Lexington Regional. 4-2 Kentucky, top of the 7th. Remember, if they win this, Kentucky advances to go play LSU in the Baton Rouge region, super regional. So that would be the 6th team. And then A&M, they're going with Nathan Detmer, their ace tonight, at home in Palo Alto against the home team, Stanford Cardinal. But winner, they go play the T-Sippers. If you're an A&M fan, you know who I'm talking about when I'm talking about the T-Sippers. It would be a potential Texas, not potential. If A&M wins tonight, it is Texas A&M versus Texas in a super regional matchup. That would be a big one. Like I said, Auburn, Vandy, Arkansas, all eliminated. Going into the day, the league was 21-8 in regional games. Obviously, some of that's changed, but the SEC's had success. But again, I named it at the beginning of the show. 5 are guaranteed. We could have up to 7 teams out of the 10 get in. So batting 70% there for the SEC if Kentucky were able to hang on and A&M to advance later this night. I mean, most impressive team for me this past weekend was probably because they doubted. I'm not going to go through each regional, but really South Carolina. South Carolina was kind of left to die. People were kind of like, myself, I thought NC State would win that regional. They went and played really good baseball. They get a shot with fellow SEC brethren. They got to go play at Florida, the super regional team. They swept early in the season. So Florida will be pissed off. Most disappointing, got to be Auburn. They went 2-out. I would say Vandy, but probably Auburn after losing to Penn on Friday night and losing to Southern Miss, who ultimately won the Auburn regional. I'd probably go Auburn the most disappointing. Right now, super regional matchups heading into next week, and we'll preview the super regional matchups on Thursday night show. But South Carolina at Florida, I just mentioned that. Then we got Tennessee versus Southern Miss. Now, they're still deciding. They'll announce tomorrow, I think at 9 a.m. Central, who is going to get to host that super regional. They're both 2 seeds, but this is what pisses me off and bothers me, I should say, about the NCAA baseball tournament. Seed everybody 1 through 64 so you don't have to go have a committee meet tonight or tomorrow morning about who hosts this regional. They're going to do the same thing for Texas A&M and Texas if Texas A&M pulls a late night win out in Palo Alto against Stanford. Both of those 2 teams are 2 seeds. No definitive who hosts. Apparently whoever bids the most, RPI I've heard been thrown out there. There's no criteria. So John Cohen and the committee is going to come out there and name either Tennessee or Southern Miss or Texas A&M. And they're just going to say they're hosting with no real criteria. You see it 1 through 64. We're not even having this conversation right now. It just doesn't make any sense. Not a lot of common sense, but again, common sense isn't very common these days. I just don't get that. It's just an interesting thing. Maybe change it up. Start next year NCAA tournament, just maybe change it up, and we wouldn't have to be dealing with committees meeting late on Monday night, Tuesday morning to decide who's hosting super regionals when this should already be planned. But you got Alabama heading. They got a daunting task heading at Wake Forest. I think a lot of people are doubting them. If I was Wake Forest, I would not be fired up for a veteran Alabama team who's faced a lot of adversity this year. We know the Brad Bohannon betting story. I wouldn't be real jacked about that, if I'm being completely honest with you. Not saying Alabama's going to go win the regional. I mean, Wake Forest has their pitching science lab outside their facility. I'm being serious. They have some kind of pitching lab. I'm going to look into it as the week progresses. They got 3 really good starters. Ballpark small. They hit a lot of home runs in there. But Alabama's got a veteran lineup. They've won a lot. No one's faced as much adversity as them this year. Kind of a team of destiny. If you watch that Saturday night winners bracket game against Troy should have won that game. Errant throw. Alabama seems like a little bit of a team of destiny. Not ready. I mean, in my regional picks, I did pick Alabama as the big upset to win this super regional. Call me crazy. Not ready to go there this week. It's a new week. Give me some time to filter it through my brain. And we still got games going on right now. We got the Kentucky-Indiana game. We got A&M Stanford later tonight. We still got college baseball. Let me filter it. But I'm not saying I'm not crazy enough to pick the Tide. I think Alabama's going to be doubted a lot this week. just the way Wake Forest, and to be fair, they dominated their regional this past weekend. It wasn't even close. Maryland, who's a solid team, couldn't even be on the same ballpark with them. And then who they had? George Mason, who they had to play twice. I don't think the ACC's had a great showing, so maybe Wake Forest is a little overrated. I've watched them a few times, not enough to really gauge. I'll do some more research this week, and I'll be able to tell you on our Super Regional pre-show on Thursday. I'm telling you, Alabama's been tested. Tennessee got upset last year. The number 1 overall seed has not won it since 1999. I'm telling you. Next, the Lexington, Kentucky regional winner. If Kentucky wins, they'll head to LSU. We're a series they won one time. They played there already this year. They went and took one. They went and took one game in that series against Kentucky, against LSU in Baton Rouge. Got a little chippy. It'll be interesting to see how that one would shake out if the Cats can pull this off. Remember, they're up in the 7th right now. I'll update you here right now for you Kentucky fans out there. 4-2, bottom of the 7th. The Cats are up right now. Moving to the next one, we got Indiana State. Obviously, Arkansas is eliminated. And if Texas A&M wins tonight, we mentioned it, they will face Texas in a super regional again. We don't know who's hosting that because we hadn't seeded it 1 through 64. NCAA, we have to change that next year. But again, impressive showing by the SEC this weekend on the diamond. 21-8 record from the entire tournaments that started on Friday going into today with LSU winning. Arkansas took a loss again to a hot TCU team. Kentucky scratching and clawing, trying to get out of the loser's bracket to win right now. And then we got, like I said, A&M playing tonight in Palo Alto against Stanford. Winner goes on to take Texas in the super regional. I'm actually just really interested to see where they decide to go with these super regional hosts. I'm really interested, again, like I said, not mean to just go off on a tangent, beat a dead horse, but you got to seed it 1 through 64, in my opinion. The potential super regional matchups I'm most fired up about, if we're just going to initially talk about it, we got to like SEC on SEC crime here. South Carolina at Florida. Interesting. Roles flip. Like I said, Florida got swept in Columbia at Founders Park. I think Tennessee Southern Miss is going to be a fun matchup no matter where it's at. But I think where the game is, the series is going to be played is going to be crucial because Tennessee, both teams are very good at home. Tennessee struggled a lot in the league on the road. Lindsey Nelson Stadium in Knoxville is just a boom, bang box. It's a launch pad. There's going to be a lot of home runs there. Southern Miss has Tanner Hall, a top 2 or 3 ace in the country, can compete with anybody when he's on the bump. Tennessee's got their rotation with Dolander, Beam, Burns now coming out of – I think that's a fun regional matchup. Alabama, again, like I said, keep doubting them. But I think it's going to be a fun regional with a veteran team versus a hot Wake Forest team. And I think we would, again, have SEC on SEC crime. Kentucky LSU would be fun. And, of course, the future SEC opponents, the former rivals, Texas A&M, Texas. I mean, who's not going to want that from that standpoint? That should be a fun regional here. Let's see when Ross is going to – let's see if he's getting ready to hop on here in just a bit. He will be on in just a moment, and we will get him on here. But sticking with us, just still talking a little regional play. Let me pull up, see if I can get you an updated Kentucky score here. Still 4-2, bottom of the 7th. And I'll keep, like I said, I'll keep updating. And then if for people paying attention, 8 o'clock tonight, about just under 45 minutes, Texas A&M will be taking on Stanford. Not real shocked overall, though, with the SEC, how they performed this weekend. I thought Alabama didn't play bad baseball. Honestly, thought Nicholls State on Friday night and Troy actually played pretty good baseball to the ninth inning for Troy. Auburn, just a complete no-show. Vandy, who I think a lot of people had them picked after winning the SEC tournament the week before, they would at least get out of their own regional, right? But it just goes to show you, nationally, college baseball isn't that covered. It really is. It really is a Southeastern thing. It just is what it is. But there's actually more crazy things from a seeding aspect. I think it happens in the college baseball regional than it does in basketball. And I think that just has to do with the sport because, as we all know in baseball, it's all about who's on the bump. Who's on the bump? Who's pitching? Like Tanner Hall for Southern Miss. He's got the ball game 1 on Friday night against Tennessee. And I think that game's been announced for Friday night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Super Regional. He's going to give Southern Miss a chance just because he has the ball in his hands if he can go 6, 7 innings. Now, like I said, Tennessee's got a good rotation to match that. But again, I think Alabama has a solid rotation to match Wake Forest enough. It's a small ballpark. Wouldn't shock me there. But again, yeah, I mean, Vanderbilt just, again, goes to my main point there. Just shows you how crazy it really is that Southern Miss, I mean, like a team like Vanderbilt can win the SEC tournament, feel good about them. I had them in Omaha, can't even get out of their own regional, lose to Xavier, didn't make it to the championship round of their own regional. But again, it just goes to show you how wild the sport of baseball is. Just people wouldn't talk about it because the NCAA tournament is so it's so much, or the NCAA basketball tournament is so much more covered from a national perspective. And the March Madness, the Cinderella story. There's a lot of Cinderella stories, crazier ones in college baseball, like Coastal Carolina, the 4 seed, winning it one year. Fresno State, when I was in high school, the 4 seed came out and won it. It came out of nowhere and won it. It happens. They get to Omaha a lot, and they've even the lower seeds have won it a lot in college baseball. I should say a lot, a couple of times, but that doesn't really happen in college baseball. It doesn't really happen in college basketball overall where they're advancing that far. Now, this year was an interesting FAU. You had FAU, San Diego State, but again, veteran teams, I think, like San Diego State, win in postseason play. And that's why I'm not totally just saying Alabama's going to lose to Wake Forest. I think they got a tough draw. I don't think Alabama was the 16 overall seed. I think they were really more in the 13 seed. And then they get a 16, but you play who you play in front. You play who you play in front of you. Nothing Alabama can do about it. Ross is trying to get on right now. See, trying to get Ross on real quick. We are back home. We're back at the home base, though. The beach is fun. In-laws, I appreciate them. Let me shoot the show there. Here's my guy. Ross.
Yeah.
What's going on, brother?
What you doing?
Dude, you're looking tan. Were you tan? You were in Destin last week, man?
I was in Destin, man. Yeah.
Did you get a chance to get the toes wet?
Yeah, Friday afternoon. That's about it. I was there Monday through Saturday, but Friday afternoon everything kind of ends, and was able to go to Crab Island and get a couple hours of sunshine and in some crystal clear blue water.
So that was my first question for you. What is the vibe down there? Like when you get down there, how many of these have you gone to now, Ross?
Not a ton. When I was a beat writer, I actually didn't go. So I only started really when I took over at SI. So in 2018, and they didn't have it in 20. So 4 or 5, I guess.
4 or 5. So.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the vibe when you get down there? Like, all right, so you got all the ADs, you got all the coaches. Like, what is like? I saw Texas A&M. They had the flag repping out down there. What is just the vibe? People walk in. Is it more lax than people think? Like you see a bunch of former coaching buddies catching up.
Yeah, that's the best thing about SEC meetings and a lot of these conference meetings. Big 12, Pac-12 out in Phoenix. It's a good like off-season time, relaxing time to catch administrators and coaches. The way the SEC does it, it's pretty long. It's a whole week. Everybody usually gets in on Monday, or not everybody, but each school probably sends anywhere from 12 to 15 to maybe even 18 people, and usually on Monday, the coaches will arrive maybe with an assistant or two, and then the athletic directors arrive on Monday as well, or Tuesday morning, and they usually have a bunch of and the coaches arrive Tuesday morning too. Everybody, I guess, is mainly Tuesday morning, and so it's a lot of athletic director, associate athletic directors, and deputy ADs. All of them come, sports information directors. It's like 15 people in athletic department. And then so they meet Tuesday and Wednesday. ADs and coaches, and then late Wednesday usually, presidents get in, and then the coaches leave, and then the presidents meet with the ADs on Thursday, and then a lot of times, this time actually, the presidents and ADs also met on Friday morning. And the big executive council meets, which is like the 3 or 4 top presidents that do a lot of the voting. They'll meet on Friday, so it's a really long week, but it's a place to catch people kind of a little laid back and casual. A lot of people bring their families too, and
Yeah,
they all stay at the
I
same
remember
Destin
they'd all
Hilton.
bring. Yeah, you're right. They
Mhm.
bring their kids, almost like a paid vacation for them just to get out there. Made
It
it yearly.
is.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes kind of a family event. They even have some like family theme type games and competitions, I think, and stuff like that. So the SEC treats it uh like kind of a family event, so to speak. And so it's a good time to like, get to know administrators and catch them when they're a little more relaxed and in environment. And then of course lately a lot of news has come out of it, because of the off season in college sports and where it's at with all the NIL stuff and transfer stuff and all this legislation and congressional. There's become pretty big news of it. This year was pretty newsy.
Yeah. So we got with us right now Ross Dellenger from Sports Illustrated, one of the most respected college football writers. I feel like you break damn near everything, dude, when it comes from a news standpoint. But so, did you feel any different vibes or not with Texas A&M being there really for the first time? I saw they didn't have a vote. Like,
No, yeah, they don't get an official vote until they are actual members, which will happen in July 2024. So I mean, they obviously give their opinion and their view. They were there for the first time at SEC meetings. They have been at meetings with SEC ADs. The SEC ADs meet 4 or 5 times a year, and they've been at a lot of those meetings. They haven't been at the spring meetings, the big one where you have the presidents and the coaches. Their coaches weren't there, but their presidents, I believe, were there. So it's a first step in really kind of integrating, I guess, everybody and getting to know everybody. It was weird to see Chris Del Conte of Texas there and Joe Castiglione of Oklahoma, but they don't get a vote, and that obviously came up pretty big on the SEC scheduling format. They don't get that vote. Had they had that vote, things may have been different, but they certainly let their voices known, and I think it was pretty obvious that their voices were kind of heard in the room, and their opinions were taken into consideration.
Yeah, that brings me to our next point. You just brought it up, the scheduling. So the voted on the 2024. Sounds like it's just kind of an interim scheduling format. And I feel like most people kind of saw this coming, but it seems like there was a little bit of an uproar. But I feel like some realistic people are kind of okay with this. Were you shocked by this decision? You just kind of sitting there going into the week that already this was kind of anticipating, or I was anticipating this decision.
Yeah, Monday, kind of before everything got going, I wrote a story about the situation and how they were kind of seriously considering this interim type of it's kind of a placeholder, whatever you want to call it, short-term, temporary, 8-game schedule in 2024. I think that there are some people that are in disagreement, and I think throughout college football, you'd find a lot of people that really believe that the SEC should go to 9 games. They got pretty heavily criticized for staying at 8, even if it's just for 1 year. Because I think the ultimate plan is to go to 9. This will be a situation where they'll eventually go to 9, maybe even as soon as 2025, they'll go to 9. And so you kind of ask, well, why? Why are they doing 1 year of 8? And I think number one is, if you're going to play an extra conference game, a ninth conference game, you're going to want some additional revenue from ESPN for that game. And right now, ESPN's going through in the middle of layoffs, and several rounds of layoffs, and they're bidding for other deals and
Like
packages.
WWE, UFC.
Yeah, UFC. Obviously, there's still a little bit in the mix of the Pac-12, the CFP. is coming open. That's kind of a real big one. It gets overshadowed, but the CFP situation, expanded playoff, they're bidding and involved in all of that. NBA is coming open. So there's a lot. So like right now is probably not the time for ESPN to announce that it's throwing $100 million extra every year to the SEC to play this ninth conference game. Maybe in 6 months or 10 months or 14 months, it'll be a little better time. So you got that, number one. And number two, a lot of SEC teams have scheduled out a lot of non-conference games. Specifically, like a good example is Alabama. They've scheduled some years where they have 2 Power 5 non-conference games, thinking they would have 8 conference games. And so they're probably wanting, if they go to 9, they're probably wanting to get rid of one of those Power 5 non-conference games. This gives them a little extra time to kind of get some of that done. And then I'm trying to think of some other reasons why. But it gives teams some time to.
I saw somebody, you may have been tweeting about it, but I saw somebody mention too. I think it's one of these ADs in an article I was reading about it. Was talking about it was kind of the difference between maybe going to a bowl game and not, or not. If you have those extra games, like I guess the Kentucky's, Ole Miss, Mississippi States of the world, the middle tier of the world, kind of trying to get that extra win so they can go to a bowl game. But I mean, what is the revenue loss there? Say like $5 to $6 million per team for that ninth game.
Well, I mean, I think that if you talk to people in the league, they would want, an additional revenue from ESPN yearly, around $5 million probably. I don't know what an extra SEC game is worth, what value it is, but obviously some of those games are pretty valuable. So $5 to $7 million every year per school annually is probably what many expect from ESPN, and also you got to buy out these non-conference games. So who does that too? Some of these are pretty costly. Some of them can cost $1 million, $1.5 million to buy out a non-conference game.
Well, shoot, I think you're right. I saw Alabama. I think Alabama in 24 starting like a home and home with Wisconsin. And I think
Alabama's
doesn't LSU have a game? Doesn't LSU have a game with USC in Vegas?
Yeah, and I think it's okay for some of these programs. It's okay to have one. You have to have one non-conference Power 5.
Yeah.
It's the years where you had 2 scheduled, and there's several teams that have 2 scheduled, and they're going to want to go in and cancel one of those games
and move that out. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. Again, if you're Ole Miss and you have 2 Power 5 games scheduled for 25, you're like, well, I don't want to go play a 9-game conference schedule right after that. No, it makes complete sense. So there were some other things I saw that were discussed on the docket. Did they ever come up? I never really saw any final decisions on the storming the field discussion.
Yeah, they didn't do anything real significant. There was a lot of talk of forfeiting home games and such and all that. They increased the fines, I believe, and then they actually made if Alabama, like this year, let's take for example Alabama, Tennessee. Tennessee rushed the field on Alabama after beating them in Knoxville. Tennessee's fine would go to Alabama. Alabama would get that money.
So the money would go. They just go give it to
right.
Alabama.
So that's one change they made. The other change they made is every school has to have a procedure and a security barricades, even security around the visiting team to get them off the field. So they have to create plans of that and get that approved by the league. And that was, I thought that was kind of the way they should have gone, is involve just that's the big thing, right? Is getting the visiting team into their locker room without any kind of disruption from the fans, which is difficult when 10, 20, 30,000 people are rushing the field. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
You're right. The Alabama-Tennessee game in Knoxville last year is a great case study.
Mm-hmm.
For a few more questions, we get you out of here again with Ross Dellenger from Sports Illustrated. Ross, I saw you read your article this morning. Talked about some recruiting rules from a standpoint. Saw you mentioned maybe some things they could come up with, maybe sign whenever you want when your senior year starts. August 1st was a potential opportunity. Move the signing day up. You talking to some coaches? What was kind of the word on that? They want to move the first week of December before the expanded playoff starts that second week.
Yeah, there are a bunch of. I think I got into like two main things, right? The early signing day, which is kind of linked with the letter of intent, and then the IAWP. So the early signing day, I think there are several different options they're looking at. Now, a lot of coaches in the SEC that I quoted in that story want players to be able to sign a letter of intent as soon as they get it, starting August 1 of their senior year. So they'll be able to sign. You'd be basically get rid of the early signing day, and
the
kids could
offers.
sign.
I think your offers would totally. You wouldn't have Tennessee throwing out 380 offers for a class.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so I saw Hugh Freeze. I mean, you would know, the kid would know where you stood with them, and you would know where you, because like you said, you send that NLI to the kid, to Ross Dellenger, and he don't sign it. It's like you said, well, like, not saying we won't get Ross, but right now he's not ready to sign or commit to us, so we know he's not all in. Whereas like you said, before that, they may be committed to you just for a spot. But yeah, I mean, I honestly, after working in it for you, I actually would like that. I feel like that would take some tension where you're not having to almost like hold a kid's hand for another 6 months when he's done with the whole process. And I'm sure I saw some of the coaches in there mentioned the high school coaches would be on board with that to help them get through their seasons as well.
Yeah, the real concern with that, I think, is high school players bailing on their senior season, because they have already signed a letter of intent. So that's why I think that's going to be a hard one to get through. That's option one. I think there's another option to move up the signing day to like Thanksgiving or earlier in December that they're looking at to try to get free of the portal window. And then there's one that Greg Sankey mentioned in that story, is moving the early signing day back to January, or maybe abolishing it altogether and just going back to how we had the February signing day. So I think they're exploring all those things. Nothing would change, I don't think, for this fall. But I think in the future, there's going to probably be a change to the early signing day in some way.
Yeah, especially I think when you add in, because you mentioned it in your article, I mean, you expand in the playoffs, that's starting right that week. It was like Sankey said in that quote you had, said we can't have teams not recruiting because they're getting ready. I mean, because as you know, the SEC is going to have 3 to 4 teams probably in the playoffs. You have 3 to 4 teams not worried about recruiting, but at the same time, I mean, you can't, because it's a lifeline of your program. But before we get you at it, what was kind of the final word you heard on the IAWP stuff? Because I remember that a couple of years ago was like one of the bigger deals in the world. Now it's kind of cooled down, because that's not really how it is anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, you know what it is, but probably a lot of your listeners don't, right? It's like stands for individual associated with a prospect. Yep. So it was meant to prevent college coaches from hiring, high school coaches and family members and that have some direct link or relationship to the recruits that sign with them. And Brian Kelly actually said in that story pretty bluntly, is that nowadays you don't have to hire a kid's high school coach or family member to get them in the NIL era, because the inducement is NIL, is what Brian Kelly said. So I think that's going to be going away. The IAWP.
Yeah,
I would imagine the next year it'll go away.
Yeah, that rule almost got outdated real quick from what it was. Because remember, it used to be, it was like a massive deal. It was like, every time I was hired somewhere, you had to go. I'm just telling a story. I remember I was at Auburn getting hired at A&M. We were recruiting down at Kellen Mond and Javon Osmond were down to A&M in Auburn, and we hosted him on an OB. And it's one of those things. It's like, I mean, yeah, we hosted him, but like the kid didn't come to. Obviously, they went to A&M, but he didn't go to any school because of me. I always thought it was such an interesting. It was like the small percentage, but it honestly hurt a lot of people getting jobs. Right. Like it was like for the small percentage of like the street agent. But now, like you just mentioned, Brian Kelly calling a spade a spade. I mean, that's not really a big deal or sticking point for why a kid would choose LSU.
Right. Yeah, I think that it'll. I don't know how soon, but this time next year, I'd kind of be surprised if it were still in existence. There's pretty good movement to get rid of it.
Hell, and just like with the new rule, the analyst can coach. I mean, that's kind of a rule I don't understand why they can. I mean, if you can hire as many analysts, why can't they coach with everything else going on? Just talking to some of my buddies who are analysts still, it's kind of like, man, we're really worried about this, but we can't coach or instruct anybody. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, that rule. There was some complaining at SEC meetings from coaches about that. And I think that may eventually happen. And I thought what was going to happen this past spring. It was put to the table of the D1 Council and recommended, and usually recommendations kind of get the rubber stamp, and that one did not. And so it kind of still hangs out there.
Well, man, I appreciate you hopping on, man. I know it's been a busy few weeks. Were you back in D.C. right now?
I am. Yeah, it's actually a really busy week in D.C. College sports is coming here this week. The SEC
I saw that.
will have SEC on the Hill on Wednesday. Administrators, coaches come in, and they'll meet with congressmen, lawmakers, all in an effort to try to lobby to get some kind of athlete compensation bill. And then Thursday is University of Arizona is putting on a future of college athletics event where there's some pretty big heavy hitters will come be involved in that. Greg Sankey, Charlie Baker, the new NCAA president, will be here. So busy time on the Hill.
Well, man, I appreciate it. Everybody. Ross Dellenger from Sports Illustrated. Believe me, I might just blow smoke with you, Ross. You break everything usually when it comes to college football. Again, appreciate you joining on the show, man. We'll have to get you on again. Look forward to talking to you here in the next few days, next few weeks. Just keep keeping us updated, brother.
Yep, no problem, Dave. Thanks, buddy.
Appreciate you, man. Ross Dellenger there, everybody. If you were just joining us, like I said, always breaking news in college football for Sports Illustrated. Me and him actually went to the same high school, both Mercy Cross. He graduated. He's a couple years older than me. Great dude, always informed, very humble guy. Enjoy talking to him on and off the record, but appreciate him joining us tonight. And before I get you out of here, I promised you the Brad Crawford article. Just wanted to go through that. Let me share the screen for you so you can see what I am looking at. Pull this up. All right, so before we get started, like I said, 24/7 Sports, Brad Crawford, after the SEC, what me and Ross just talked about, the SEC announcing their 8-game conference schedule, really kind of interim. I don't know why it's getting so much flack, but there'll be one permanent 7 rotation opponent as we stand right now. He went in, he's projecting the 2024 opponents for all 16 SEC teams going into that year, including Texas and Oklahoma. But let's get it started. I'm going to tell you what you think. These are his projected opponents, conference opponents for everyone in the SEC. And I went through everybody's non-conference schedule today for the SEC in 2024, and I'll bring that up too as much as I can remember a lot of these teams. But for Vanderbilt, let's start off with the Clark Lee and the Commodores. Brad's got the 2024 common opponent or SEC opponents: Kentucky, at Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, at Florida, at LSU, Ole Miss, and at Mississippi State. That's not too bad, but remember, Nick Saban kind of spoiled it for the SEC. They did a 10-year case study on how successful these teams were in the league, and they're going to try to make it as competitive and fair as possible. Remember, Nick Saban's not real fired up about a 9-game conference schedule now because of Auburn, Tennessee, and LSU being his common opponents. But again, I think this isn't too bad for Vanderbilt. It is what it is. They don't get Texas or Oklahoma or Alabama. So that is good for them. I think if you're Clark Lee and Vanderbilt, this is about as good as it can get for you. Moving to Zach Arnett, this will be his second full-time season as he takes on the schedule potentially. But here is, according to Brad Crawford from 24/7 Sports, again, their projected 2024 SEC opponents from Mississippi State: Texas A&M, at Alabama, Arkansas, at Ole Miss, at Florida, Auburn, at Oklahoma, and Vanderbilt. Interesting matchup with them going on the road to Norman. I mean, you see a lot of former SEC West teams here, real familiar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, obviously, A&M. And again, there'll be no divisions. I should have told you that in the front of there'll be no divisions in 24. No more East-West. It'll just be the top 2 teams will go meet in Atlanta for the SEC championship. So get that out of your head when I'm going through this. No more divisions, no mas. But not a bad schedule for Mississippi State there. Really not a bad schedule. I mean, figure they keep Alabama and Ole Miss in 24. Some of their common Western Division rivals there. Again, at Oklahoma, get Vandy. It's not too bad. As you see, I'm going to tell you when I think someone kind of got a bad draw. Missouri, Eli Drinkwitz, if he's still there, I think he will. I think they're going to be better than some people think if they get the quarterback situation right. So he should see this schedule. But Brad is projecting Texas A&M, at Ole Miss, Georgia, at South Carolina, Oklahoma, at Texas, Arkansas, and at Auburn. If you see there's not a lot of former old Eastern Division opponents. And again, no more divisions, but a lot of this looks geographically to me. I mean, Texas isn't that far. At Ole Miss is a little random there. Georgia, obviously, from these at South Carolina, the Battle of Como. Then Oklahoma, at Texas, Arkansas, and at Auburn. Very SEC West heavy. Like I noticed that too, as you see that right there from what Brad stated. But that's one of the more outliers I noticed when going through their schedule was the really not a lot of East teams outside of Georgia and South Carolina, really, for the most part. Moving to the Ole Miss Rebels, Brad projects them to go at Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, Missouri, at Arkansas, Kentucky, at Tennessee, at LSU, and at Texas. This really isn't that bad to me. Alabama's off. I think as we move forward in the SEC, I don't think you're going to see as many Alabama-Ole Miss matchups anymore. Sorry if you're an Ole Miss or Alabama fan and you enjoy that rivalry. I don't think we're going to see that as much anymore. But you get in Vanderbilt here if this all comes true. Obviously, Mississippi State, the Egg Bowl is going to be the common opponent. Missouri, not a bad draw. At Arkansas, border state, you figured you kept that. Kentucky, not bad. At Tennessee, if Heupel keeps that train rolling, I think they'll be pretty good in 24 as we stand right now. Of course, the Magnolia Bowl, they're going to keep at LSU. And at Texas, it's not a bad draw for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels, honestly. If I'm an Ole Miss fan and Lane Kiffin, I'm not that upset if that's what actually happens 2024. And remember, June 14th, I believe they're having a live show on the SEC Network announcing everybody's 2024 conference opponents. No dates, but they will be announcing everyone's 2024 conference opponents. Moving on, Kentucky, Brad projects Georgia at Ole Miss, Florida at home, at Tennessee, Texas A&M at home, South Carolina at home, Auburn at home, Nat Vandy. Again, not terrible. I think Ole Miss and Kentucky did a pretty good job from a competitive standpoint and not loading them up, putting with both Oklahoma or getting 3 out of 4 of Oklahoma, Texas, Alabama, or LSU, Texas, Alabama, something like that. I think this is pretty fair. Georgia, common East team, at Ole Miss, Florida, at Tennessee, A&M, like I said, South Carolina, Auburn, Nat Vandy. Not bad there for Mark Stoops. And I think that would be something they would be like, we got a fair draw. Auburn, Hugh Freeze, so he'll be going into his second year. Brad Crawford projects they'll keep that oldest rivalry in the South at Georgia. Texas at home at Jordan-Hare. That would be a really fun game. Really fun game. Conference foes now. It's going to have to get out of everybody's head in my own, but keeping the Iron Bowl at Alabama. Missouri, it's a decent draw for Auburn. Can't be upset about that. Keeping Mississippi State on the schedule. Can't be too upset. South Carolina, as you know, it seems like everybody wants to keep South Carolina on. I don't know if it's easy to work with Ray Tanner. They just like Shane Beamer. I don't know what it is, but we get to Florida here. Florida's requesting to keep South. It seems like everybody wants to play South Carolina. South Carolina at Kentucky, LSU. Not really a bad draw. Not really a bad draw for Auburn there. I mean, between kind of the middle tier teams of Mississippi State, Missouri, South Carolina, and Kentucky, you get 4 of them. That's not really bad if you're an Auburn fan and Hugh Freeze. You take that. Speaking of the Gamecocks and Shane Beamer, Brad has them projected at Florida in 24, Georgia at home, Texas A&M at home, at Vanderbilt, at Kentucky, Tennessee at home, at Auburn, and Missouri at home. Again, kind of keeping that East vibe here. I mean, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, they're playing everybody out of the East except themselves. So, I mean, yeah, then they played A&M every year. So their schedule's not going to be that foreign to what Gamecock fans are used to, really. The only team would be at Auburn, and apparently that's something they're going to start trying to get with some regularity right there. But not a bad draw for South Carolina. A lot of familiarity with that. Florida, Billy Napier, as long as they're not terrible this year, he should be there in 24. But Brad Crawford has them projected to play South Carolina. We just talked about LSU, keeping that second-tier rivalry going just for 24 is this moment. At Tennessee is right now. That's still in the schedule. Everybody remembers that in the 90s. That was the game. The who's who was going to go represent the East in Atlanta. I like that. I think it's a very underrated rivalry in the SEC. It's kind of been watered down a little bit just because both Florida and Tennessee have had their down periods in the last 10 years, but I do like that rivalry. Vanderbilt at home, Georgia sticking in Jacksonville at the next few years, Mississippi State at Texas and at Kentucky. Imagine Florida going at Texas. There's going to be some fun games when some of these traditional SEC teams are going, when Texas and Oklahoma are going back and forth playing some of these traditional SEC teams that they're not used to playing. But again, I didn't think this was that bad of a draw, honestly, for Florida. You throw in at Texas, getting some brand on brand there. That'll be fun. Don't think this is that bad. Really don't think this is that bad. At Arkansas, I thought they had a pretty tough draw here. Brad has them at Mississippi State, LSU at home, Texas A&M still in the Southwest Classic at Jerry's World, at Texas, Oklahoma, at Missouri, Ole Miss, and Alabama. I mean, LSU, A&M, Texas, Oklahoma, and Alabama out of the 8. That's tough. That's 5 right there. Ones you feel like you can maybe go get at Mississippi State, at Missouri, and and Ole Miss, and those aren't guaranteed. I mean, I'm not saying Texas and Oklahoma are bringing a lot to the punch in the 2024 first season, but still, just the brand names. I think Arkansas has probably got one of the toughest ones we've seen so far through going through the schedule. I think you'd be shocked by somebody's schedule coming up here, but I think it's a brand-on-brand thing. And here's another team, I think, Texas A&M. Brad has them at Alabama, Oklahoma, at South Carolina. Yes, their common opponent right now. Texas at Missouri, at Kentucky, Arkansas in Arlington at Jerry's World we just discussed, and at Mississippi State. I keep changing my mind on this one a little bit. The more I initially see it, I'm like, man, that's tough. But, I mean, the thing is how good in Oklahoma and Texas are going to be. And I know we're just projecting. We're a whole another season away from doing this, but it's fun to talk about, especially this time of year. Man, it's at Alabama. It'll be interesting to see if A&M and Alabama still continue to play yearly. Again, this is just predicting, but Brad's usually on top of this. He has good sources when it comes to this kind of stuff. So I'm taking him it is what it is. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give this probably a 7.5. I want to go 8. Sometimes I want to go 7 when I go back. Not as bad as the Arkansas one. I think Arkansas going back up has kind of got one of the tougher draws so far. Tennessee, according to Brad, would draw at Georgia, Alabama, at Oklahoma, at South Carolina, Florida, at Vandy, Kentucky, and Ole Miss. I think getting Vandy and Kentucky sticking with that's probably going to be annoying. Tennessee fans should get used to that. I mean, obviously Vanderbilt, Tennessee sharing a state, Kentucky being a pretty consistent rivalry, even though Kentucky rarely wins that game. But this isn't a bad draw for Tennessee. You had to expect Alabama and Georgia were going to be on that schedule. They were probably just from a brand standpoint. Oklahoma or Texas was going to be on there. You keep the 2 East teams at South Carolina and Florida. You get Vandy, Kentucky, and then you throw in Ole Miss from the West. Not a bad draw if you're hype going to 2024, which I think this could be a really good Tennessee team in 2024 because the roster would be replenished at that point. LSU, Brian Kelly said he wanted a piece. He wanted a piece when he came to the SEC. He's about to get it. Ole Miss, according to Brad, at home, at Alabama, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, at Florida, Texas, at Arkansas, and at Auburn. LSU drawing both at Oklahoma and at Texas. The new kids on the block getting both. Obviously, they're going to keep that Alabama one. Ole Miss, we talked about that's a little bit of a rivalry. I think an underrated rivalry in the league, again, it's not talked about, and especially if you're not real familiar with the league, is the Auburn rivalry at LSU. The home team wins a lot. Auburn finally broke that streak in Baton Rouge, hadn't won since 1998. A couple years ago. Crazy enough, Brian Harsin broke that record. Never would have predicted that. But anyways, I think this is a pretty tough draw. I mean, you get both. If Oklahoma and Texas can get right, obviously Alabama. What is Florida going to look like? Vandy, decent draw. LSU, Vandy don't play much. I mean, crazy, but they'll fit into that. Ole Miss going to keep that at Arkansas. See where Pittman, not a terrible draw, but could be tough depending on the swing games or swing teams between Oklahoma, Texas, Florida. What's Ole Miss looking like? And Auburn with Hugh Freeze. Moving to Georgia, Kirby Smart, I thought this was relatively light. Just like their schedule this year. I know they get crapped on with their schedule this year. The SEC forced them to cancel the Oklahoma game, so I'm not as hard on Georgia as most are for their schedule for this past year or this upcoming season. But this one's a break, I think. At South Carolina, Auburn, who's the South's oldest rivalry, Florida and Jacksonville, at Kentucky, at Missouri, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Alabama. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, they're very similar to South Carolina where they play everybody from the East except themselves. They play everyone in the East, 6 out of the 7 teams. You can't play yourself. And they get Alabama, and they keep Auburn out of there. I mean, that's a pretty easy draw if you like Georgia. It's a little. They got a little East taste to that. Still, I know they're saying there's no divisions anymore, but if you're a Georgia fan, you got to feel like you put your hand in the cookie jar and you got away with it a little bit from a scheduling standpoint. I mean, you're keeping a lot of the East, and the East is down right now outside of Georgia. Big gap. This actually turned out to be true, and we'll find out, I believe, on June 14th. This would be a big schedule break for Georgia. This is pretty easy. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to go this is a 4. And then Alabama. I think Alabama's got the hardest one because I think they want to get all these brand games with Alabama. Here's Brad's projected 2024 SEC opponents for the Tide. LSU, Texas A&M, both at home, at Oklahoma, Mississippi State, at Tennessee, at Georgia, Auburn, at Arkansas. That's tough. I mean, that's tough. That's the toughest one, in my opinion, right now. If all of this were to be true, now it's all not. But like I said, Brad's very close, very plugged into this. I think some of this is he's been talked to some sources off the record. But I feel like there's a night and day difference between Alabama and Georgia. They talk about competitive fairness and going through the last 10 years. This isn't really fair if they had to do this. And I know I don't want to be one of those people that's saying it's not fair or life's not fair. I get that. I get that. But they need to go back and analyze if this is anything remotely of the road they're trying to go down from the scheduling standpoint. And they talk about competitive fairness and some teams having a competitive advantage over others. Georgia's playing, let's call it what it is. Let's call a spade. Let's get this down to layman's terms. 2 + 2 = 4. Georgia's playing an SEC East schedule while Alabama's getting one of the new boys. I mean, Georgia didn't even get one of the new guys, and they're one of the brand name. But I say new guys, new kids on the block. Oklahoma and Texas, and Georgia's the second biggest brand in the league right now. Just doesn't make sense. That was one I kind of stuck with. Moving to Oklahoma, he hasn't projected playing at Arkansas, at LSU, Texas in the Cotton Bowl, still keeping that going. At Missouri, Mississippi State, Alabama at home, Tennessee at home, and at Texas A&M. Kind of kept it geographically. You can tell Arkansas, LSU's right there, Texas, Missouri. Mississippi State's really the only one totally, and Alabama out of the way. But again, Alabama, Oklahoma, they want to keep that brand. That first year, I think Alabama's going to get the brunt end of the schedule because they're going to want to put a lot of brand names that first year in the conference. They need to give Georgia or Texas. They need to give Georgia one of Texas or Oklahoma. Speaking of the Longhorns, Steve Sarkisian should be going into his fourth year? Yep, fourth year. 21, 22, 23, 20. Yep, this will be his fourth year if he inherits the schedule. Brad has Texas projected to play at Texas A&M, Missouri, Arkansas, Ole Miss, at Auburn, Florida, Oklahoma, and at LSU. You know what games with Texas going into the conference I think would draw a lot of people to these cities and stuff? Ole Miss, Texas. Call me crazy. There's a lot of kids from Texas that if they don't get into Texas or Texas A&M, they want to go get the SEC experience. They go to Ole Miss because Ole Miss isn't very hard to get into, just like a lot of just like Alabama, Mississippi State. It's not a shot at Ole Miss about it not being hard to get into. They just go there for that experience. I think there'll be a lot of Ole Miss fans in Texas if they start playing regularly, and a lot of Texas fans coming into Ole Miss to visit buddies who they went to high school with that are now at the University of Mississippi. Just threw that out there. I thought it's an interesting time. Every time I went and visited Ole Miss as a student, I feel like I always met a new person from Texas. That was always the reason why. But I think this is an interesting first schedule for Steve Sarkisian in 2024. Obviously, Texas A&M and Oklahoma are going to stay on the schedule. But then going to at Auburn's the matchup. If this were to stay the case, and at LSU, that would be real interesting, in my opinion. Remember, they were supposed to go at LSU in 2020. Supposed to return that trip after LSU beat them in 2019. With Joe Burrow, LSU winning the national championship in 2019, but in 2020 they canceled that game. They were already supposed to play this, but I don't think that's too bad. It's to be expected schedule there for Georgia. I mean for Texas. But I think the two teams here, in my opinion, that kind of stand out a little bit is Alabama. I think they're going to try to brand Alabama to death that first year. They're going to try to let that horse work. I'm using horse racing analogies, and I don't know anything about horse racing, but I think they're going to make that horse work just to get it. Oh, we got to get Alabama, Texas. Now, granted, I say that they would be playing back-to-back years. I doubt that happens, but we got to get Alabama versus Oklahoma. Oh, we got to keep Alabama LSU. Well, of course we're going to keep the Iron Bowl. Oh, but Texas A&M and Alabama, especially if Jimbo's there. Jimbo Saban, we got to keep that. We got to get Alabama going back to Athens for the first time since 2015 against Kirby and the boys. We got it. It's first year. They're going to try to hammer that home, get the brand names out there. But you can't let Georgia just play an entire SEC East schedule and not give them any of the new kids on the block. And when I keep saying that, new kids on the block, Texas and Oklahoma. So those are my two biggest gripes. I think a little over heavy for Alabama in Brad's predicting, but I see where his thought process is there because they want to get their top dog out there playing all these top games to get more eyes on the television so they get more money. Simple math. But that's all I got for you today. I'm trying to get you out of here so you can go see the end of this Kentucky Indiana game. I'm about to give you a final score update. Let's see what the score is right now before I get you out of here. Kentucky baseball. What are the Cats doing right now? See what the Cats are doing before I get you out of here. Kentucky 4-2-1. Kentucky won. Kentucky will be the 6th SEC team. At the end of the show, we got this. To advance to a super regional, they will be heading to Baton Rouge to face LSU in a super regional. These two teams already faced this year. LSU getting 2 out of 3. Came down to a rubber match on Sunday. Both teams are a little chippy. Should be a fun one. So we got 2 SEC on SEC super regionals. South Carolina heading to Gainesville to play Florida. Kentucky, like I just mentioned, heading to play playing LSU in Baton Rouge for a super with the right to go to Omaha. So we're guaranteed at least 2 SEC teams in Omaha. But just wanted to update you that. before we got out of here, again, we got a lot of regional action coming up this upcoming weekend. We could potentially have 7 SEC teams. They got 10 hosts. 7 out of the 10 teams, if A&M wins tonight, advance to Super Regional weekend starting on Friday. We'll keep you up to that. We'll preview all the Super Regional matchups on Thursday night's episode. We had Ross Dellenger from Sports Illustrated talking about what happened on the beach down in Destin this past weekend. All this stuff is talking about the new recruiting rules, the 8-game schedule, kind of the vibe with both Texas and Texas A&M coming officially to their first meetings. They had the flags out as you drove into the Hilton Destin Resort. So we talked to, like I said, mentioned Ross Dellenger, Sports Illustrated. Go follow him on Twitter. He's going to break something probably here in the next week. He always does, but I appreciated him hopping on. We talked basketball portal, big decisions coming up. Alabama's got a few more holes to fill in their roster with Grant Nelson and a couple other guys making some other decisions. They need some depth in that front court. Mississippi State got to feel good. Chris James, where they're going from. Ole Miss and Auburn both getting some football portal additions. Again, we're starting to get a little talking season, as Steve Spurrier would say. But again, we got to wrap up some SEC baseball. Again, Kentucky just punched it, 6th SEC team. A&M's got a chance tonight to be the 7th team to advance to Super Regional weekends. Stay up to date. Keep following us on all social media platforms at Mock 10 Sports on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever you're listening to. Keep following us. I'll see you again on Thursday night to preview the Super Regionals coming up, and may even sneak in a guest in if we have time. But again, I appreciate you joining us. You have a fantastic week.